Well, good afternoon, assuming that's where everyone is, or good morning if you're on the other side of the pond, and if you're still joining us from Australia, good morning. Very proud and pleased to be able to welcome you to the launch of our sparkling bottle weight accord. And I'm delighted to welcome two excellent speakers today. Erin Williams from North South Wines. And we've asked her to talk about what it's actually like to put the accord into practice. Obviously, not yet the sparkling accord because we're just launching it, but they're part of our mainstream accord. And then Fiacre O'Donnell from Encirc, and really asking him to look at how bottle technology and the way in which bottles are made has really revolutionized what's feasible in terms of lightweighting in really quite a short space of time. And Fika's Iris link gives me sort of a nice sort of Radio 2, a sort of late night DJ link over to what I was doing this time last week. I was in Dublin, and apologies for Fika for not having popped up to the north as well. Speaking at an event at which the whole of the Irish wine industry, obviously that's the sales end, are looking at a joint position. And one of the things they're considering is that the whole Irish wine industry will put in place a bottle weight accord allied to ours. So I think that demonstrates how important this whole issue of bottle light weighting is. And obviously, from our perspective, what we're doing today with the sparkling bottle weight accord builds on the success of our still bottle weight accord, which we launched 2.5 years ago. And we've now got around 3 billion bottles within the accord, which is about 10% of all the wine sold in the world. And at the end of last year, so that was 2 years in, there'd been savings of nearly 500,000 tons of carbon. And for the FDs on the call today, had all of that weight saving taken place under the UK EPR regulations, members would have saved nearly £60 million. Now, obviously, that's hypothetical, but bear in mind that EPR is coming into the EU. The relevant regulation comes in on the 12th of August. So this is not just a hypothetical. This is real cost savings. And obviously, what we'll be doing is launching a new phase of the bottle weight accord later this year to pick up at the end of the current accord. Obviously, building on the still bottle weight accord, sparkling bottles seem to be the kind of obvious next step. However, it is much more complicated for a number of reasons. First of all, the range of ways in which sparkling wines are made. Obviously, still wine is still wine. It's not under any pressure. And sparkling wines are made in at least 7 different ways. But obviously, we couldn't be in a situation where we had a bottle weight accord for each type of wine. So we had to segregate into a sort of what seemed to be a reasonable set of categories. The second factor, of course, is safety. If you drop a bottle of still wine, it just makes a mess on the carpet. But if you drop a bottle of sparkling wine, you've got potentially quite a dangerous explosion. And so obviously that needs to be, taken into account in terms of bottle weight. So the research was done during 2025, and the paper was published at the end of last year. And really looked at target weights by 3 categories. Again, trying to draw a square along the various different categorizations. And we ended up with 3. The traditional method, so famously Champagne, Cap Classique, Cremants, then Charmat method, tank fermented, and then semi-sparkling wines. And looking at the SKU lists of a number of our retail members, those 3 categories cover well over 95% of all the sparkling wines. So it's not perfect, but it squares that circle between the need for doability, but at the same time, something that actually reflects reality. The second point to make in this case, which reflects the safety issues, is that with our still bottle weight accord, the target is for an average below 420 grams. Now, obviously, when it comes to sparkling wines, because of the safety issues, we've gone for target weights. So aiming for target weights rather than an average below, because what we don't want is people say, aha, we'll go lighter than the target and potentially put in place bottles that are not safe in practice. Safety issues critical. Obviously, the important thing is making sure that the bottles that you buy are properly produced, properly made, that the production lines in which they're made have the proper safety interfaces to make sure that they're properly robust. Handling in the supply chain, the carbonation levels, filling levels, temperature management, all of those things are critical. So that was sort of the core of what we were dealing with. And that's led us over the last few months to negotiate the terms of a sparkling bottle weight accord. And again, as with the Still Accord, the aim is to do something that's practical. We're not here about some sort of academic perfection. We're about doing something which is practical in use. Hence, a categorization of sparkling wines, which is not perfect, but it allows that most retailers, most producers to be able to say, right, we understand where we fit. I also think it's critical to stress that what we're looking at here is a direction of travel rather than a strict goal. If participants in the Accord don't meet the requirements by 2030, which is its closing date, they're not going to get, lashed to the mast and whipped or anything like that. Apart from else, we don't have the ability to do that. But the point is, it's a direction of travel. It's an ability to say, look, this is where we're going, and that's certainly what we've seen with the still bottle weight Accord. People come to us and say, look, this is the way things are moving. We might as well be part of that process. Um, but it's so therefore it'll become an industry standard as 420 has done for still wines. But it's also important, I think, to share the successes and challenges, and Erin's going to come to some of that in a moment. So therefore, three elements of the Accord, three weight categories. Traditional method, so champagnes and so on, the target weight is 780 grams. Charmat method, a target of 600, and semi-sparkling, a target of 550. Now, again, in each of those cases, there are already bottles being used and have been used in practice in the real world at those weights for a long period of time. So we're not setting weights which are imaginary or target. These are bottles that are already being used. The reporting requirements, again, we're trying to keep it straightforward. What we don't want is a measurement process which ends up being too unwieldy for people to feel that they can operate within their systems. So quite simply, as with the Still Accord, we just want the sales weighted average bottle weight in grams in each of those three categories, if that's applicable. The total sales volume in bottles during the reporting period, so that'll be annually, and a brief comment from each of the participants about how they've got on, because the sharing experience of how it goes is important. Um, so, why should people be part of it? When we started the main bottle weight Accord, we had six signatories who were all retailers. And it pretty quickly became clear that others along the supply chain wanted to join in. And the first grower to join was Talavitis in France. And their comment was, well, we're getting more requests for lighter bottles, so it makes sense to be part of the process. And so we're pleased, therefore, to be able to launch today with 10, yes, 10 founding signatories of the Sparkling Bottle Weight Accord, which include both retailers and growers, but also companies of different sizes. Because again, it's important to stress all of the stuff we do. If all it does is appeal to the large companies, then we're missing a large trick. A lot of the wine sector is smaller and medium-sized companies. Everything we do needs to be applicable to them. So we have, in no particular order, just the ones I wrote them down in, Vinaki, Alco, The Wine Society, Ellis Wines, Guy Anderson Wines, North South Wines, Perlage, Villanelle Cava, Virgin Wines, and System Belaget. But obviously, we want to expand the Accord. So why should you join? What are the benefits of participation? Well, obviously, the core stuff is the ability to share learnings, but also to know about bottle availability. One of the issues that's come up from the Still Bottle Weight Accord is that a 420 gram or lighter bottle is not necessarily available everywhere. And we have data from, Fiacre and other companies about what bottles are available where. And that's something we will be taking forward also to the Sparkling Accord. For retailers, well, obviously in the UK, there is already a direct cost saving from lighter bottles. And as EPR is rolled out in other markets, there is going to be a direct cost saving to using lighter bottles. And obviously through SWR, you can grow the speed of adoption for lightweighting by using us as the means to, drive the industry change in the industry, which will save you money and carbon sooner. For producers, bottle weight's your most significant carbon impact. So it's kind of it's a no-brainer as part of, or even the start of a sustainability strategy. And although factors like viticulture are hugely important, they're relatively slight when it comes to the carbon calculations by comparison with bottle weight. And increasingly, lightweight's what your customers will be asking for, what your buyers will want. So it makes sense to deliver what the client wants. But also using the Accord to showcase that you understand the issue and are being proactive. And for all those that question the link between lightweight and premium wines, both Perlage in Italy and Champagne Telmont are great examples of how sustainability and premium sparkling wines can go hand in hand. But there's also a benefit for regions as well. Wine regions are all obviously competing to get attention of the drinking public, and it's an opportunity for regions to be able to demonstrate leadership to the industry. To help the growers, the individual organizations understand what are the real retail incentives for lightweighting, what are the emission savings. We've just talked about before we started about cost savings in transport, which some of the work that we're doing at the moment suggests are very real. And so for all, it's a sales opportunity. We've just been doing work on the wider questions around packaging. And consumers want sustainable, but they don't pay more for it or they won't make an effort to do it. If you make it easy, they will do it. They will buy the sustainable option. Lightweighting makes it easy. Using lightweight bottles can drive sales growth. Quite as simple as that. So that's enough from me, so I will shut up. And I'll now pass over to the wonderful Erin Williams, who'll give us a bit of a lowdown on what it's been like to be part of the main bottle weight accord and what you hope that the sparkling accord will achieve for your business.
Well, thanks, Peter, and hi, love to be here. So I think the kind of key thing for North South Wines as an importer and distributor within the bottle weight accord, when we were always interested in what was going on, and we signed up formally last year in terms of the still with bottle weight accord, just because it felt like actually this is something that can make a real difference. To Peter's point before, EPR obviously is a conversation that many of us are having, and it was one of the biggest kind of reasons originally to sign up. We were really conscious that as we produce a small amount in the UK through our suppliers, what we could do with our own direct kind of agency was really important. And so that's why we focused a lot of that effort originally. So working with 300-gram bottles in that way, we were really aware that it would help shift our entire portfolio average down. But I think the most important thing was how we started asking our suppliers what weights they have. It wasn't something that was always the case. It kind of trickled in. We'd ask, obviously, and have it on things like bottle books and our internal services, but it wasn't really factored in the same way. And so when we started asking, oh, are you thinking of lightweighting? What are you planning on doing? All of a sudden, it was a conversation that had never been had before. And that was really the driving force for us to sign up for the sparkling weight as well, because it felt like a bit of a no-brainer to be kind of having a tool to encourage these conversations, to say, oh, well, we are signed up. We'd really like for you to help us get there. Obviously, some of our suppliers may say we can't get that far. That's okay. But it felt like a really useful and valuable effort to be able to start that conversation. Now, I was just saying to Peter before, we recently surveyed our suppliers just to kind of ask them, are you below as an average, so that we don't have to trawl all their data. And from our kind of still wine, 22 out of the 34 who'd come back on that question are now well below the 420, which is a really great demonstration. They were not when we started asking, and we've seen quite a few shifts. We get emails from our suppliers quite frequently being like, this is being reduced, and that's a really positive ongoing engagement. We've asked the same question as whether on the sparkling, whether they're planning on to reduce. So we've got 9 that have already started, 2 that are planning, and 3 in the next year. So I think it just demonstrates that if you prompt the question, you might find an interesting answer underneath as well.
Thanks very much, Erin. I think it's important to understand how one organisation, yours, can end up having that sort of knock-on effect down the line by just asking the question. And I think that's often a challenge. I mean, for the wine industry generally, but particularly around sustainability, because it's quite fragmented. It requires that sort of collaborative action to sort of push things forward.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, obviously we are also under the pressure of what the customers want, a lot of the big supermarkets, etc., EPR, and we ran our materiality assessment at the beginning of the year and asked what's the most important thing to all of our stakeholder groups. Packaging won by an absolute landslide in terms of the importance to customers, but also suppliers really kind of starting to think about it. And so for us, that was really the kind of clear indication that the conversation is not going to go anywhere. It's only going to get more rampant, more important. And actually, if everyone's saying the same thing, maybe it's in slightly different ways, but actually, how can we play our role in engaging in that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think certainly some of the conversations we've had with some of our big retail members, I think they sometimes feel it's quite difficult to sort of get that message out. So again, it's the rationale for having a process like this. Okay, Erin, thank you. So now, Fiacre, over to you. one of the things that constantly comes up is this question of, well, lighter weight bottles, be that still or sparkling, are going to be more fragile and therefore more dangerous in use. My experience, particularly from visiting your site up in Chester a couple of years back, is that bottle technology has come on leaps and bounds, and that therefore sort of almost any consideration of bottle safety 5 or 10 years ago is OTS. I mean, one of the things I kept on coming across doing the sparkling research was, people remember the great bottle bursting of 2015, and to the extent to which that is any longer relevant. So, Fiacre, over to you.
But yeah, I mean, technologies have advanced substantially over the last number of years in bottle manufacture, both from IS machine technology for making the bottles themselves, but also from an inspection perspective, what it is that we want to check the bottles for. But I think we just also have to be very careful when we talk about the safety of glass, that we put the right glass with the right product, and understand that whole mix of where it comes from. Obviously, if we look at this from two sides, if you like, from a cost perspective, obviously the less amount of glass that you're putting in, the better the bottle's going to be. The cheaper the bottle's going to be. Take transportation and so on. As Erin has rightly alluded to earlier as well, by reducing the weight on transport, what is the equivalent of that? An EPR is a serious piece of legislation that's just been terrible, in my opinion, what it is that it's trying to achieve. And we have quite a strong lobby pushing back very strongly on EPR at this point. But the other side to that really is the sustainability piece and the challenge that's coming through there. And therefore, can we marry up the technology or the skills that we have in bottle manufacture with what we hope to get from a bottle out of that? So I think when it comes then to matching a bottle to your demand, there's a number of things you really have to think of. And you mentioned earlier, the levels of carbonation is probably fundamental to that. Now, if you're taking a still wine for the sake of argument, I know her maybe, and carbonating it, well, we have the ability to do that and control that levels of carbonation with natural methodologies. I'm guessing there's a higher level of variability can sit with that, and therefore the higher level of variability that must sit then with the appropriate bottle then in line with that. There's also considerations around where that bottle is going, where it's been filled, how it's packaged, and so on. And when you take all those things into consideration, I think that you then get to the nub of what is the sweet spot for that product that you're manufacturing. So if I was to take you through that, for example, if we would always push customers whenever we're looking at lightweighting or even new designs of bottles in any way at all, is to involve us as early as we possibly can, because we can help make sure that design works, and then we can help make sure that what we're going to deliver is suitable for what's required, without getting to a point at the end and then having to come back to it. So a number of considerations. Let's take the carbonated piece. We've mentioned it already. What is being filled in the bottle, and what is the pressure that those bottles are going to have to withstand? The second thing, and one that's easily missed by a lot of people, is where you're filling this. So what we found in the past is customers moving to lighter weight bottles, filling it in the same production line as they filled it before. There are sharp corners, there are stop points and so on, and bottles are breaking in those. So a review of your filling line, now that's not an impossible task. If you do have a filling line that needs modifications, that can be done. The final market, where's it going? How far is it traveling to? And also, how are you packaging it? So again, we find that people move to a lighter weight bottle, they move the outer packaging to a lighter weight and so on. Protection that's maybe afforded to the bottles through the packaging is now disappearing again. Another consideration is how you want the bottle to appear. Do you want embossing, debossing? Do you want spotting lugs or whatever on the bottle design? All those add weight. So you're compromising a wee bit on the decoration on the bottle then, if you want to try and reduce the weight back somewhat. Another one that used to keep coming back to us when we first trialed from I suppose the bottle wine accord idea. We first trialed this back in 2012, and we made a 300-gram wine bottle. I thought it was a terrible looking thing, right? It was much shorter and so on. It looked like a stretched milk bottle back in those days, but that's what we can make. But size impression then was something that kept coming back to us. Does it look the same as everything else on the shelf? And then the last piece, then we've mentioned it there, is the consumer misconceptions maybe about weight being a relevant feature when it comes to the quality of the product that's actually inside the bottle. So I think from our perspective, we would always look at the big risk isn't lightweighting. It's really looking back and making sure that whatever you lightweight to is the absolute suitable bottle for the product that you're filling.
No, I think that makes a huge amount of sense. I mean, certainly some of the conversations that you and I have had, implied that some people are looking at lightweighting and not necessarily properly taking account of some of those safety factors.
Yeah, I mean, we take, I mean, the evolution of how this has gone. If we go back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, starting in this industry, 330 ml beer bottles were 230, 240 grams. They're now 170 grams. As a percentage reduction, that's massive. And bear in mind, they have a level of carbonation as well in them, albeit not nearly as big as some of the main carbonate sparkling wines that we're talking about here. But the technology, the capability, the inspection, the control that we now have in glass is massively different to when it was even 10 years ago. And it's a continual evolving of that technology as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I've seen your manufacturing line, the quality control, the various quality control points are incredibly rigorous. And I think, we've said that in the call that ensuring that bottles are properly manufactured is a pretty important starting point.
It is.
And also we do know, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also it's your point about including your bottle maker early on in the process. I think it wasn't specifically with Encirc, but one of our Australian members, Wirra, wants to lightweight their bottle, and this is a still wine. And they basically sat down with their bottle maker and said, what's the best way of going about doing it? I think sometimes, again, it's having that conversation. It's sort of saying, this is what we want to achieve, how best to go about doing it.
But sometimes, I suppose we're coming at this now with years and years of experience in it as well, and understanding going with lightweighting. And one of the big benefits that we've had all through our time is working closely with the beer industry for years and where the beer industry are. So if we look at all our filling technology in our Elton site, that was all designed with breweries in mind for oxygen uptake and so on. So there is no flexible hoses in the entire system, with the exception of the one from the tank to the infeed. And likewise with beer guys, then we've been through this pain with them of getting down to lighter weight bottles, putting the bottles down their line. And obviously they will even be much thinner walls than you will find in still or sparkling wine bottles. And you get catastrophic failures then, because all of a sudden they had a little guide rail that was sitting out with a sharp edge on it, which made no difference to a heavier bottle, but all of a sudden this thing is ramming into it and they're breaking everywhere. That's the capability, I think, and there's testing kits that we have for that. Push, test, bottle down it, and we'll measure those. But again, fundamental.
Yeah, exactly. Just coming to some of the questions we've had in the chat, and again, feel free everyone to put your questions there. Erin, I'll leave you play to Luke in the chat.
I did. I can answer it again if it's useful.
Well, no, but I actually think it's an interesting point that, certainly we've seen there's a kind of a differential approach to it. And it would just be interesting to have a bit more sort of light and color on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I guess there's 2 points on some of this. I mean, our South American and North American suppliers and vineyards tend to start with a heavier bottle. So some of those are still absolute whoppers, like the 800 gram mark. And so they're more resistant to the conversations because they're selling to additional markets. And we all know that the North Americans like a really heavy bottle, or that's what we're all told. And so I think even though they are willing to reduce, they're still quite a way off. Not all of them, but they're still quite a way off on some of their bottles or some of their ranges, which they don't want to budge on. I understand why. Then they are doing, I guess, additional ranges which are in lower weight. So their internal average is coming down, but some of those bigger ones that are still there. I think within the wider anything that we kind of bring in on bulk, as I said, is light, and that's from a conversation that we have with A, the customer, and B, our kind of suppliers as well, to make sure that they're comfortable with some of those decisions. Australia, I think, is probably the place where they've seen the biggest change. They still do have heavy on some of the reds especially, but it's definitely been an area where we've seen more reduction, and I guess more appetite too. I don't know how that'll be this season because there'll be less bulk coming out from the kind of recent reports on that. So for the next year, we will see. But yeah, I think there is a shift. How quickly that shift's happening is different in each of those markets.
It's interesting you mentioned Australia. I mean, we've been working with Wine Australia on our packaging work over the last few months. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously, because of the distances,
Yeah.
Our kind of working number is that about 50% of the total carbon footprint wine is the bottle. For Australia, Wine Australia's figures, it's 74% because historically has been, because of just the sheer distances. So yes, they'd be much more open to things like bulk shipping and so on. I mean, I think it's.
But I think that's part of, for me, the bottle weight accord and how we talk about it within North South Wines is the kind of together, because if we're having a conversation and we're changing and shipping by bulk with one of those suppliers from kind of Australia or Chile or Argentina, then all of a sudden, actually, you've done a massive chunk of the work by saying, depending on, obviously, brand, etc., that we're bottling in the UK for some of those, that it means that actually we don't have to account and we're putting them in lighter weight when they're in the market anyway. So I think the two can be used together, not always, because on some of those, they want to be bottled in country, they have specific branding or design that they might want to go with, but there is always some of those conversations which allow a more interesting way to think about how those and the relationship between the two.
Yeah, again, that becomes, in a sense, you're making the same point that Fiacre was making. It's about having those conversations. I mean, certainly, in some origin markets, there are labor implications if bulk shipping were to happen, and obviously sustainability has to be balancing. Okay, yes, we want lighter weight, but you don't want to put people out of work. Couple of questions for you, Fiacre. Do you know roughly how many different bottles you have at weights that are below the accord weights for sparkling?
No, we have very little sparkling. We've only launched one quite recently, actually, and it's right in contradiction to the bottle wine accord. But it was for Wine GB. It's something that it's the first one that we have launched here to try and make the source of those bottles local. So sparkling wines for us, we've very minimum amount. Still bottles, we've everything now from 300 grams.
I think that's right. And I seem to remember, again, I can't remember who I was having the conversation with when I started the research 3 or 4 years ago. Sort of like, well, if there's more demand for lightweight bottles, we'll make them. And I think it's one of those chicken and egg situations.
It is chicken and egg because sometimes, the bottles are there before there's a demand for it. So, we've had I remember us having the first conversation about the bottle wine accord and you going for 420. I think we discussed this at the London Wine Fair, and I remember saying to you, 420? So we sell 300 million at 339 grams. So why are you going with 420? So
yeah, it's we had to do something that was doable, and wasn't going to scare the horses. I mean, Jay, coming back to the availability piece, I think is important because obviously one of the things, okay, we're talking about sparkling today, but the next step in the process is going to be where do we go next on the main bottle weight accord? And there are two questions. Do we go lighter, or do we say actually, and we'll pick up on the point that Tom's making in a sec about redundancy, or do we say, right, we've got 10% of all the world's wine, let's go for a third of all the world's wine, ... But in which case, that point about availability, that point about, are bottles going to be available becomes, pretty critical. Because there's not necessarily that, which is why us working with guys like you is pretty essential. Another question for you, Fiacre, from Tom Perks: is it possible to reduce the weight of an existing bottle whilst keeping the same size and shape, so we don't have to change our closures, labels, boxes with sizable origination costs?
Yeah, and that's really down to how much of a change that we do actually make on it, because at some point the glass wall will have to shrink to a particular size. In order to compensate for the weight loss to try and maintain the profile. But once you start going down in weight, you will start compromising on either height or diameters or shape potentially. to do that. Or again, if the basis of it has a cartouche or something on the glass at the minute, take that off. We'll take grams of weight out of it as well.
And I think this is why it's one of those things, certainly from our perspective, that it's how does one do this in a graduates process? That, and a point I think that was made in the chat, redundant crates for resizing of bottles. Well, fine, in which case perhaps you wait until those crates need replacing anyway, and then you do your bottle lightweighting at that stage. Obviously one of the questions we had both with the sparkling and with the still Accords is, do we then have to rebottle stuff that's already vintages that are already bottled? Which the answer is no. This is about, as I said in my opening remarks, this is about a direction of travel. And if for certain organizations, for various reasons, that takes time, that's fine. Comment from Siglinda. Actually, this probably to you, Erin, actually. How do you take into consideration the social and economic impact when making environmental decisions? Like importing bulk will take away jobs and finance from the country buying from, which might be very needed in that country. And Siglinda's out of South Africa, where this is a point of real consideration.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's actually something I debate quite heavily with the team quite frequently about it, because I think there's a real balance between what you can say. For instance, like, I know that in South Africa, it's one of the lowest bottle weights they currently have is 350 available. So I think that's obviously under, I'm talking for the still weight accord, but that's under the accord. So there's a definite opportunity there. Where we're looking at bulk, it tends to be with people who are already doing bulk. We are not necessarily bringing not many of our suppliers are making the decision to switch. It's a conversation they may have done a little bit and they might be increasing, but I think it's a really fine balance. It's something on our recent survey we've asked is whether they're kind of in low-income community areas, mainly so that we can then overlay that exact data, because before that we were kind of going on their word of what was going on in the local area, well as we can do a bit more digging into kind of if there is any challenges or if there is any vineyards that we might need to kind of have a different conversation with. That's something that we'll be looking at in the next year. But there isn't an easy bullet that can mean that you can support both. In my opinion, I guess as a sustainability professional, I'd want to view it that holistically. I don't think that saving some carbon should be kind of resulting in 50 people losing their jobs. So there's a real balance, and that is definitely not what we'd want to ever see happen if that was the case. So yeah, I guess it's thinking about who you're partnering with, what they already have, what they're already doing, how their portfolio is already split, and being able to kind of look at that in more detail and overlay all of those additional jobs and markets. Because I think the final point on that is some of those businesses are shipping in bottles. They're not getting them from the local community, they're not being bottled in the local community, but they are shipping in from places like China for lower weight, etc. So I think, again, that's an additional complexity just to add on to the mix of this around sourcing and what that looks like.
Yeah. No, I think that balance thing is always a junction point, because obviously the sort of carbon purists will say that you just have to look at carbon, but as we know from the conversations we've been having around the wider packaging agenda, you might say, well, okay, glass is heavy and therefore lots of carbon, let's use plastic. Okay, fine, you've got lower carbon, but you start to get yourself into even just on the environmental side of things. That's before you even start considering some of the points that Siglinda was making.
And then you can add in the likes of seasonal workers and whether it's seasonal for bottling plants, etc., etc.
Yeah.
You can so all of those additional layers can mean you want to consider lots of different pieces, but there has to be, I guess, a net benefit from your decision rather than it just being an equal, in my opinion.
Absolutely right. And I think, Peter, you're absolutely right to highlight that point again from a sustainability perspective. And Chris has asked a similar question there about sustainability being an all-encompassing topic, and so it is. Carbon's only one aspect of it. And who was it? Was it McKinsey or something? Or some of the guys had done the carbon tunnel vision study some years ago, and basically making the point that if we concentrate just on carbon, we can fix the carbon problem, but we will do so to the detriment of both people and nature. So we have to look holistically at it. And again, Chris's question there is about potentially higher costs of production from a sustainability perspective. there's a huge amount of opportunity within business to look at sustainability as a way to drive better processes and so on. And I like to look at sustainability as removal of wastes of materials, energy, and people, the skills that are there. And sometimes when you address those in a particular way, that you can find that it doesn't necessarily lead to a more expensive production process. In fact, it can save. I can give you numerous examples of stuff that, by involving people in our business, how they went, actually, that's a problem, but instead of doing this, why don't we do that? So, for example, our air compressors, the room in our where our air compressor was too hot, the guys were going to put in chillers. One young engineer said, well, what about we do a heat exchanger instead? For £5,000, he designed and built a heat exchanger, which now heats our office building, which used to cost us £15,000 a year to heat. Now, the problem with that is this is a nice day for Fermanagh. Let's say, okay, it's 21 degrees. But on a 21 degrees day, the heat is still coming through the radiators here. So, it's a bit hot on it. But so there's the holistic approach is definitely something that we need to consider.
I think isn't that why God invented the thermostatic radiator?
Yeah, well, exactly. But you get told off because the heat's coming anyway. So.
But I think all joking aside, I mean, and one of the things we've been starting to do is to reframe sustainability as durability. Because there is this trope, again, it's a trope that sustainability costs you money. Well, I was with a vineyard in Italy, Ricasoli, a couple of weeks ago, and he maps his vineyard. So he knows exactly where he needs chemical and where he doesn't need chemical. So he saves himself money. Increasingly people are looking at composting rather than, okay, you could say composting, lovely sustainability practice. Well, actually, it means you need less highly expensive fertilizer. Well, why worrying about packaging? Well, EPR means you can save money. It's direct pounds, shillings, and pence. If you're worrying about water, well, if you're in South Australia, not worrying about water means that you probably won't have a vineyard in 20 years' time. So I think if you take out, in almost any discussion, if you take out the word sustainability and put resilience or durability, that question about potentially higher cost of production, it's almost the risk of not doing something about it, I think is important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're looking at the concept here of using farm waste, could be vineyard waste or anything like that, to develop biomethane. An output from biomethane is digestate. Digestate is a wonderfully high phosphate-based fertilizer, good for growing crops and so on, or in fact can be used as a substitute in cement products now. So all of those can combine together to give us a biomethane for production, which removes a lot of the carbon from the manufacturing process, whilst having knock-on benefits in other industries as well.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Just one point to answer that's still in the chat. Chris is asking about the 3 different bottle types of 3 categorizations. Is that to do with the atmospheric pressure? Yes, absolutely. I mean, yes, they're broad generalizations because you can get, for example, Proseccos, which are slightly higher carbonation levels, but broadly, semi-sparkling, relatively low carbonation levels, Prosecco, and then with Charmat methods, and then traditional methods are the highest, which is why we've got those 3 categorizations, and obviously, therefore, relatively heavier bottles in each case for all the safety reasons we talked about. But there's an interesting point that Sam Lindo is making in the chat. Basically, it says transfer method, a way of using all the kit we have, but transferring the trad method wine into lighter bottles with a lower pressure. The breakage point becomes an internal one and easy to manage. That sounds interesting. So if we are able to have...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I was particularly keen on using lighter weight bottles, and there is a 600 gram traditional method bottle for 6 bar. And we know that we can have traditional method at 5 bar, and the customer experience is no difference. But when we looked at the lighter weight bottle, we would have to replace all of our kit. So much, it's just, it'd be about 20 tons of metal. And we're just not sure whether that's sustainable in itself. But traditional methods still taste the same if you transfer it instead of disgorge it, which is obviously what's done in Australia. And you could just transfer it into lighter weight bottles, quite a lot lighter weight. And because they don't have to go through the riddling process, so the glass manufacturer will probably back this up, it doesn't need to have the same coating and the same design in order to go through that process. And then we can reuse the bottles internally. It's a lot safer because we can wear the kit required, and the customer isn't going to take that pre-damaged bottle home.
That's fascinating. And I mean, it's issues like it's points like that which I didn't know. I didn't know it because I didn't know it was there to know. And that's fascinating. Fiacre, do you have any comment on that?
It's just back to that same thing. It's back to and Sam's point on controlling that level of carbonation is perfect. I mean, the other idea of reusing the bottles that you then have there is perfect. I mean, glass is a perfect material for that reuse thing. So again, you're saving having to bring more of the heavier weight wine bottles in. Sticking with the ones that you have, reusing them and putting the other ones out in lighter glass makes perfect sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, it's innovations like that which are really interesting. And I suspect if we were to put that idea to the CIVC, there would be considerable sucking of Gallic teeth. But that's not to say it's not a good idea and shouldn't be done. You know, as Fiacre's comments made clear, bottle technology has moved on significantly since then.
But Peter, is that them really erring on the side of caution because of the variability that they get in terms of pressure within the glass? You know, they can't guarantee a specific.
The short answer is I don't know, and I certainly don't want to imply that I'm speaking on behalf of the CIVC. But I think it was. I mean, I think it's probably just a function of the fact that any of those bodies has got a million things to think about, and obviously at the moment their area of focus over the last couple of years has been on labor rights because they had those issues with heat stroke deaths a couple of years ago. So I think they've probably been focusing on that, and they've not reviewed this point. So obviously, I don't know whether CIVC is going to be listening to this now or in future, but we're great to have that conversation because I think the potential for champagne to lightweight bottles is brilliant.
I think Sam made a comment there, and you can control.
I think just to add to that, one of our biggest champagne suppliers, they just recently underwent from 900 to 835, obviously based on recommendation, right? So it's not that they're not always willing, but we're very conscious of the fact that the years that we'll have to sit on a champagne bottle is different for this. So even if I guess our conversation then is around whether that would be something we can or will be around, whether that's something by 2030 we could reduce it by. That won't be on shelves for years, but it just is the way it would be.
But I think that's where the direction of travel thing is important because I mean, obviously, and if you're talking prosecco, obviously, the prosecco that is currently being will be consumed this weekend at myriad weddings will have been on the vines this time last year. Whereas you say champagnes, they might not actually be on shelves for 10 years. But again, I think that's why it's the direction of travel, and also I think that it's let's not let the perfect become the enemy of the good. It's when we launched the initial bottle weight accord, part of the reason for going for an average below was it meant if you had growers or marketing teams that dug their heels and said, no, we need a heavy bottle, it's fine. Okay, well, off you go and do your thing. We've got now 3 billion bottles which have been lightweighted over the last 2.5 years, and no one from the consumer side has made any observation. So it shows it can be done. And if you end up with those that want to stay with it, well, that's fine. They're a minority, and I think it's how one demonstrates that change over time. Another question from Luke. Both of you to respond to this. Do you think there's something that should be done behind the scenes to benefit consumer market, or should we attempt to translate the benefit to consumers in marketing? Interesting question. It's been really
excellent question. I have a split view on this. And I guess this is probably more my opinion than North South Wines. I think from a consumer perspective, unless there is better labelling in supermarket where most people are purchasing their alcohol from, and I mean that as widest banners underlining, explaining what it means, the size of a pack, like people, by the time they've looked at the label of the front of a wine, they've turned it round. That's the last thing that most people, they might go, oh, what does it pair well with? If there's a note about that on the back, they're not going to spend the time in the shop. It won't be until it's on the table that they'll actually read anything about that weight. So I think my opinion is yes, absolutely. We need marketing and we need work on it. I think it should be a wine aisle challenge and a tackle so that we can all talk about it in an easier way when we have things out. And that might also be a kind of wider poster campaign for instance. But there needs to be the context that those people have already. So we were just having a conversation recently about what the average weight was. Obviously, it was 550. It's not quite, we don't know necessarily exactly where it sits at the moment outside of the Accord. And we were saying, right, so what, if we're saying 550 was the average weight, what are we trying to aim for a certain packaging? Like, how can we show that in a really quick, easy visual? Is there something we can do? But again, that's on pack once someone's taken it home. They'll get the education on that. That's not going to happen in the shop.
I tend to agree exactly there with Erin on this one. I think what this is an opportunity for the wine industry to take some kind of a position on this and make it a big news story for the wine industry. Now, might that attract newer entrants back into the wine market that have gone from it? We talk about, or we hear about the wine drinking populations getting older and older. Well, there's an opportunity here for that entry thing, and maybe it's the sustainability angle that might get younger people back into this.
Yeah, and I think if people go to the report we published at the end of the last year, we've done more work looking at it since. What Fiacre and Erin have said is absolutely right, that broadly most consumers won't pay more for sustainability and they won't make an effort to do it, but if it's easy to do, they will do it. So if a retailer says, here's one bottle of wine, this one's lighter, therefore it's more sustainable, buy it, they will buy it. So I think that sort of, in retail, that point of sale piece that makes it clear that these are more sustainable wines because of the lighter weight. And we do know, because that's what the evidence gives us, that generally speaking, younger people are more likely to prioritize sustainability as a factor in their a driver in their decision-making process. And so, yes, absolutely, it is a way, I think, of wine being able to go to younger people and say, look, this is more sustainable. You can go and buy it and feel good about yourself. And there was a piece of work actually which was done by Armando Corsi from University of Adelaide, which looked at Australia, the UK, Australia, South Africa, and America. And it sort of found that lighter weight sparkling bottles, not champagne bottles, but other sparkling wines, were associated by young people with fun and enjoyment. And so therefore, I think the point that Fiacre made, that it's this sort of package debate shouldn't be to loop back to our question about, is this just another cost? There should actually be something we all look at as being, how do we really use packaging choice as a way to get to new markets, to get to people that aren't drinking as much wine? I think therefore it's really rather exciting.
Yeah, and I think, and I did mention this to you, Peter, and I know I haven't said it to you, but I will. A piece of research that we have done quite recently as well, breaking age groups into 3 different age groups and seeing what packaging choices they were making and why. And it was interesting when we went through that process and we introduced kind of like a health aspect to this, how people went from being, don't care about the packaging, to, oh, this is really interesting, but I still want somebody else to do the thinking and so on for me, and just present me with, you should do this because.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's people want an easy life, and if we can make it easy for them, then they'll do it. I mean, another point from Chris Fleming. Do you see that there's a serious conception of quality associated with heavier versus lighter bottles, similar to what wine producers have experienced with Stelvin? Screw caps seen as being lower quality. Message about quality important. I'll make a couple of remarks, then pass on to the other guys. This perception of heavier bottles means better wine. Yes, there are some demographics in some markets for whom that is the case. For most people, to pick up on Erin's point, they simply don't think about it. And all the research says that most people simply don't even think about the weight of a bottle when it comes to their choices. It's, I've got ragu tonight, or I've got fish. What do I get? What's the price, obviously? And certainly of the 3 billion bottles we've had under the Accord, there's not been any pushback that we're aware of from any of the guys involved, that consumers start saying, oh, this is a lightweight bottle, it's not as good. That's not to say there aren't people for whom that's the case, but as a general rule, it's not the case. And also, as I said before, just now, if you've got some people that want to stick where they are, well, fine, okay, they're probably a tiny proportion of the market anyway. Most wines, as Fiacre said, even before we started, were all in bottles way below our target. Again, you guys comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can add the fact that, so there is some, I guess, premium wineries doing some really cool stuff. Was lucky enough to judge the awards last year, and we got to see a lot of sustainable bottles, I guess, in the mix of those. And we looked at and kind of awarded someone at the low end and someone at the high end for that exact reason, because you can still make beautiful bottles with beautiful packaging and make it premium with a lower weight. In some ways, it's actually more impressive if you're able to give off that, because people, for the small market, as Peter was saying, that associate weight, if they know the brand and they recognize the brand and they pick it up and it's still beautiful and it's still something that entices them to pick it up, that's done most of the work. You only look at a big bottle because it looks bigger. That's why a lot of people, in my opinion, are drawn to them. They are slightly big on the shelf. They look chunkier. And then obviously the kind of, the income and everything that follows on that. But I think there is doing some great things. I think there should be more. I think the more that do and play around with it and find a way that works for them will be more interesting and provide, I guess, more of an interesting market as well, to kind of recognise that they can be more sustainable with their own bottles and kind of appeal to a wider market as a result.
And the strength of a brand behind that as well. So when we did that research recently there, price, and let's call it flavour, and brand were the three key criteria that people looked at in that order when they were making a decision. That was across 500 people of different ages and different demographics, and it kept coming out.
Yeah. And again, really what Erin said is it does demonstrate the importance of what you were saying, Fiacre, that it talks your bottle maker as stuff. And I think, again, I suspect sometimes many growers will sort of see a company like Encirc and think, well, we just buy the bottles from them, rather than actually, well, let's have an engaged conversation to say, well, we're thinking about this. What might we be able to do? How might we be able to work with you to get that to happen? And I think that's something that we I think moving forward with this accord, and as we move forward on the revising the main accord, I think we need to sort of focus on more to make sure that's part of the conversation. Okay, nothing coming. So, but Fiacre, Erin, do you have any sort of last remarks? That sounds a bit termed, but concluding remarks. Fiacre, I'll start with you.
I just make the same comment in it. There's massive opportunities within the industry to reduce the weight of those containers, and working with glass manufacturers will help you do that. But I think if it's something that's a challenge for you, if you're concerned about it, I think maybe pick a specific bottle instead of changing everything. Have a look through your range, try and find out what the current specification is for it, maybe what your tonnage currently is. All glass container manufacturers should be able to tell you the carbon footprint of what it is that you have at the minute, and maybe pick one and try it. See, it's not too difficult to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Fiacre. Erin?
Yeah, I think my final remarks really is just about kind of what you were saying, Peter. This is an aspiration. We are very conscious at North South Wines whether we will get there working with our suppliers, but we want to have that as the precedent that we want to get there. And I think we've got 4 years to be able to have those conversations and try and get those improvements. And that's a fantastic opportunity for all of us to just engage in different conversations. Ask some tough questions, go back and ask them again 6 months later. They eventually will go, fine, we'll have a look at it. If people, because it isn't on everyone's agenda. It's not the most important thing, especially for those small vineyards that we work with. They're aware of it, but it's not the priority. And so I think beating the drum and kind of making sure that you and they understand the benefits is a really great thing to do, and it will have a big impact. 100 grams off a sparkling bottle is going to be massive for some, and as it was for still 100 grams or 200 grams off some of those bottles was big numbers. And the only other point to add is obviously purchasing costs on bottles and things with less glass can often be price benefit. As well as the fact that it can then come into a negotiation on logistics in the future if that's something you're able to evidence. So there are benefits all the way around, in my opinion. Brilliant.
Well, thanks for that. And we've had a rather nice closing remark from Chris, like the creative thinking on this panel. So thanks to Erin and Fiacre. But it's not an odious problem, it's an opportunity maybe to reach new consumers. And I think that's absolutely the way of looking at it. I'm not saying this as being yet another thing to get through, but actually there's a real opportunity here. But as both of you have said, it's about having conversations. It's about making it clear why you're prioritizing it, why you think it's important, and but then bringing people along. And I think the point that Fiacre made, it's not you're here and suddenly you've got to be over here. It's like try it out, see how it works. See what try it on for size. And I think that goes for sustainability more generally. And then gradually move over time. And it's this direction of travel, I think, is incredibly important. So at that point, as we are on the hour, I'd like to thank our speakers, Fiacre and Erin, very much for joining us. It's always a great pleasure to talk to both of you. And to the audience, thanks very much for being here. I'd just like to say, please, we've launched with 10 participants in the Accord. We've got various other organisations we're talking to. So please let us know. Please join the Accord. And at that, just bang on the hour, have a great rest of your day. Bye.